Kenny here once again. Welcome back to DFS Zone, your source for daily fantasy sport lineup advice for the NFL and the NBA. Got a brand new video for you guys, man. We got week 8 of the NFL, some quarterback plays for us here in the DFS Zone community. But before I get started, like always, guys, I appreciate you guys drop a like. And if you're new to the channel, this is your first time here, never seen any of my NBA or NFL lineup advice videos, subscribe down below, become part of the DFS Zone community. And make sure you put on those post notifications, which is that little bell icon. Make sure you turn that on. This way you don't miss out on any of the NFL or NBA lineup advice videos. Okay, week 8 of the NFL. I normally give out at least 2 to 3 quarterbacks per week. This week I have 3 quarterbacks for you. I'm going to go over them right now. Obviously, this week got a 10-game slate. Patrick Mahomes is right at the top in 9,200. I mean, he's worth it. I'm going to have some exposure to him. I'm going to be totally honest with you. Pretty much the last few weeks, I've been putting Patrick Mahomes in my lineups because he's had his worst game this year has been about 18 fantasy points on Fanduel and I think 20 or 21 on DK. So he's been solid. He's a good cash play, and he is definitely a good GPP play because he has all that upside where he can get you possibly 35, 40, even above 40 fantasy points. So I would say, for me, you know, he's definitely someone that I'm going to always put up in at least one lineup. He will be in at least one of my lineups. I'll find a way to make sure I get him in there. So Patrick Mahomes is in play. Other than that, I'm going to come all the way down. Ben Roethlisberger at home is a viable play. I mean, he plays very well at home. Big game. He needs to continue to win to get back in the standings. So I know it's an important game for Pittsburgh. But I'm going to go with Andrew Luck this week. I have not had Andrew Luck all this year at all, but he's been playing really, really well over the course of the last 3 or 4 games. He's been pretty solid. He's here at 8,300 on FanDuel, and he is 6,300 on DK, which is a great price on DK. And I usually gauge my pricing on players when I decide on football. I pretty much gauge it at like 2.5 or to 3x. You know, usually 2.5 to 3x. If I was just to go with just 3x here, you know, you need about 24 for the 8,003. I think he can get you 24 fantasy points. But at 6.3 on DK, he's absolutely great at that 3x. You only need 18, and I think he's going to smash 18 in this week's game. But Andrew Luck, he comes in 10th in the NFL in passing thus far this year. His completion percentage is at about 65%. He's actually been pretty good in the red zone as well. As you can see, he's 278 yards per game, 20 touchdowns thus far, and 22.3 fantasy points per game. The last 4 games, that's what I'm looking at. He has had at least 23 or better in all 4. His biggest game was 35.6 fantasy points. So we know he's capable of getting you in the 30s. So he could definitely meet that price. And, you know, last week, man, again, the most important thing that I see here is that he's just getting the ball in the end zone. I mean, 4, 4, 3, and 4. He's averaging 3 touchdowns or better over the course of the last 4 games. 3 out of the 4 games, 4 touchdowns. Last week he only threw 156 yards for 4 touchdowns because he was efficient in the red zone, and he actually got good field position a number of times last week. So he didn't have to throw a ton of yardage, but he didn't have to throw a whole lot either, as he threw only 23 passing attempts and had 17 completions against Buffalo. But again, in the last 4 games, if you tally this up, 27.1 fantasy points per game with 15 touchdowns. That is pretty impressive over the course of 5 games. Indianapolis coming in, they're 11th in passing offense this year, 267 yards per game, 20 TDs. Mr. Andrew Luck in the red zone, he's been fantastic. He's been the top quarterback in the red zone thus far over the last few games. He's right now moved all the way to the top. Inside the 20, he is 60% completion percentage, 32 of 52, 237 yards and 17 touchdowns. When he's inside the 10, he's been just as efficient, 71.2% completion percentage, 15 of 20, 62 yards, 11 TDs. So that means as he's gotten closer, he's putting 11 out of the 17 from inside the 10. Going up against Oakland, 13th in pass defense, not terrible, not the greatest, but not terrible, allowing 267 yards per game, and they're going up against an offense that puts up pretty much 267 yards per game. So definitely a good matchup for Mr. Luck. Going up against quarterbacks this year, they have allowed 12 touchdowns and 20.3 DK and 19.5 FanDuel points, which is not terrible, but definitely doable for Mr. Luck. In the red zone, offenses have been converting 52.7% of the time against the Raiders, 3.3 opportunities per game and scoring 2 touchdowns. When we look at the offensive side for the Colts, they are averaging 70% conversion in the red zone this year. They are doing very, very well there. So they're in a good position. Andrew Luck, like I said, has been just absolutely wonderful in the red zone. As long as they get inside that 20, he has been efficient and he has been very good at getting the team in the end zone. So Andrew Luck, I definitely like him this week. It's the first time I'm taking a stab at him. I think he's in a good matchup against Oakland. Hopefully he'll be able to put up 3 or 4 touchdowns on this game as well. My second quarterback, like I said, I have some exposure to Roethlisberger. I'm going to have some exposure to Jameis Winston, no doubt about it, in this matchup against Cincinnati, just due to the fact that Jameis Winston's offense is based on passing. You know, they don't have a good run game, so their offense is all, you know, revolved and is set up to be a pass-oriented team. But I definitely favor Andy Dalton more in the matchup just simply because he's home. So I'm going to speak about Andy Dalton. He's my second choice at quarterback this week. Andy Dalton comes in 15th in the NFL in passing thus far this year. He's completing 63, pretty much almost 64% of his passes. He's averaging 260 yards per game, 15 TDs, as you can see here on the screen, 18.3 fantasy points per game. He's 7,800 here and 6,200 on DK, which is a much better price. Cincinnati comes in here 18th in the NFL in pass offense, 250 yards per game with 15 touchdowns. They're averaging 7.1 yards per catch, which is not extremely high. He's in the middle of the pack of the league. They're going up against Tampa Bay, man. Tampa Bay, well, again, just looking at, listen, Andy Dalton hasn't looked great in the last couple of weeks. He has 17-13 here and only an 8.9 in the last game against Kansas City. Granted, it was against Kansas City, one of the better teams in the league, but nonetheless, that was a poor defense for Kansas City that definitely played better last week. But 8.9 is really a doubt. He needs to pick it up. This is an important game for Cincinnati. If he cannot get it going, he's going to find himself that, you know, he ain't going to be in Cincinnati much longer over the next year or so, because you have to get over the hurdle at some point. When they had that opportunity to go 5-1 a couple of weeks ago against Pittsburgh and they did not come through, now they're in the tailspin here. They need to get a win. This is a big game for Cincinnati. They're at home. All these home games are very much winnable for them, and they need to take advantage of them. So if Andy Dalton doesn't get it done this week, if there's any week he needs to get it done, this is the week. Then he needs to bounce back after 3 pathetic weeks where he really didn't go off at all. His best games, 25 and 26, where we know he's capable of getting 20 or more in a game. And I think this is the week that he's going to have that opportunity, as he's going to go up against the 29th ranked pass defense in the NFL, one of the worst in Tampa Bay, giving up 328 yards per game. He's got to get 300 yards passing this week, 8.8 yards per catch, while he's averaging 7.1 as far as his completions are concerned. So he has an opportunity to get 8 or more yards on this team. They also have allowed 18 TDs. That's the most in the NFL for Tampa Bay. They're also 28th in the league as far as receiving yards allowed to receivers, giving up 341 yards per game thus far against receivers, 11.7 yards per catch. It's quite a bit. Quarterbacks, they've given up the most fantasy points to quarterbacks this year, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 30 DK and 27.3 Fanduel. In the red zone, they've been horrific. They cannot seem to stop their opponents when they get to the red zone. They have allowed the opponents to score 85.7% of the time, at least a touchdown, 4 opportunities a game, and coughing up 3 touchdowns. So, and then if you look at Cincinnati, they have actually been the second or third best offense in the red zone as far as conversion. They've been in the red zone. They get their 3 opportunities per game, getting 2 touchdowns and a field goal at a 72.7% conversion ratio. So they are doing very well offensively when they get in the red zone. They're attacking with Green, Mixon, and Boyd. They're going to need all these guys to step up. This is a great opportunity for Andy Dalton. I think that he, this week, will get his 20 or more and finally get at least 2 touchdowns or better. He has an opportunity to do it. He must take advantage of it. And I'm willing to put some money on him this week. So Andy Dalton is in play for me. We come down a little bit further. I am also favoring Baker Mayfield against Pittsburgh, just due to the fact that Pittsburgh has given up quite a bit of yardage to quarterbacks. At least early on in the year, they've gotten a little bit better as of late. But Baker Mayfield did not play in that first game against Pittsburgh in Cleveland. That was Tyrod Taylor, first game of the season that went into overtime. But Baker Mayfield here, 258.2 yards per game, 6 touchdowns, 15.8 fantasy points per game. He's at 7,200. He's 5,700 on DK. Love that price a little bit better over there as far as him getting the fantasy points needed. his game log. He comes in here, and, you know, he's averaging 22 to 23 completions pretty much per game. If you look at it here, I mean, so he's throwing the ball enough, and he's getting enough completions. It's just not enough yardage. Only has one 342-yard game, one 300-yard game, but he has thrown touchdowns in pretty much every game. He's averaging at least one in every game, and he's had multiple touchdowns in 2 out of the 4 games that he has started. He also can beat you a little bit with his feet and get those additional fantasy points, which we always love. We love a dual threat quarterback. He had 4 rushes last week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for 43 yards. And that's about 10, maybe about 10 and a half, 11 yards per rush. I think about 10 and a quarter. So 21 fantasy points, if you round that off, is pretty much a 21 spot. Not bad at all. He had an 18, pretty much a 19 spot 2 weeks ago against Baltimore, which is a very, very good defensive team in all phases of the defense. And they're going up against Pittsburgh. You know, they're going up against Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is 17th in pass defense this year, giving up 282 yards per game, 7.4 yards per catch, allowing 15 TDs, which is the 5th most in the NFL this year. They also are 17th as far as overall receiving yards allowed to receivers this year, 305 yards per game to the receivers. So definitely a good opportunity for Mr. Landry and Baker Mayfield to connect a little bit more this week, as well as David Njoku. 12 yards per catch the receivers are been allowed. Pittsburgh has allowed in games as far as receptions are concerned. Versus quarterbacks, 4th most fantasy points per game thus far this year against quarterbacks, giving up 26.4 DK and 24.6 Fanduel. In the red zone, they've been pretty decent. 60% conversion for the opponents. They're getting up there about 4 times per game and giving up only 2 touchdowns and a field goal. Cleveland, on the other hand, as an offense in the red zone, they have been only like about 54%. They get 3.5 opportunities a game they get down there, and they've only been scoring 2 touchdowns. So an opportunity to get 2 touchdowns, hopefully 2 passing touchdowns, or at least 1 and 1 rushing for Mr. Baker Mayfield. But I think he has a great opportunity here to get about 300 yards and get 2 touchdowns or better, and make sure and definitely open it up for Mr. Landry to get a lot of touches. You know, I'm going to definitely be speaking about Mr. Landry in the receivers video. But that's pretty much it, man. I like Baker Mayfield. I also, like I said, I have some exposure to Jameis Winston. I think he's definitely someone to consider. Ben Roethlisberger, you should definitely consider also in a few of your lineups. If you do multiple lineups like I do, you should definitely have some exposure to Big Ben at home. And of course, you should never pass up at least a lineup without Mr. Patty Mahomes. And that's basically it, guys, man. I hope you liked the video. Drop a like. Good luck this week. I'll see you guys on the next video.